The wind howled outside Jake Miller's cabin, like a wild animal, trying to break in. The snow had been falling for 3 days straight, and showed no signs of stopping. Jake stood at his kitchen window sipping hot coffee and watching the white storm rage across his 10 acres of Montana wilderness. He had lived alone here for 5 years now, and loved the peace it brought him. Jake worked as a mechanic in the small town, 15 miles away, but he always looked forward to coming home to his quiet cabin. The nearest neighbor lived 2 miles down the mountain road, so Jake rarely saw other people unless he went to town. He liked it that way. People were too complicated, but machines made sense to him. A strange blue flash lit up the dark sky for just a moment. Jake blinked and wondered if he had imagined it. Lightning during a snowstorm was rare, but not impossible. He finished his coffee and was about to head to bed when he heard a loud crash from somewhere behind his cabin. The sound was different from falling trees or shifting snow. It sounded like metal hitting the ground hard. Jake grabbed his heavy coat and flashlight from beside the door. He pulled on his boots and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him like a punch too. The face in snow immediately began sticking to his beard. He followed the beam of his flashlight around the side of his cabin, toward the backyard. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Something sharp and electric hung in the air, like after lightning strikes very close. Then he saw the tracks in the snow. They were not animal tracks or boot prints, but long smooth grooves like something had been dragged. The tracks led from a cluster of broken pine trees toward a dark shape lying near his wood pile. Jake approached slowly with his flashlight pointed ahead. The shape was definitely not natural. It looked like a person, but something was wrong. The figure wore strange clothing that seemed to shimmer even though it was covered with snow and ice. Jake could see long limbs and what looked like pale skin, but the proportions seemed off. When he got closer, Jake realized this was not a normal person at all. The being lying in his snow was clearly not human. The skin was a light blue color like winter sky, and the arms and legs were longer than they should be. The face was delicate with high cheekbones and a narrow chin, but the eyes were closed. Jake knelt down beside the figure and saw it was female, though clearly not human. She wore some kind of fitted suit, made of material he had never seen before. It looked like metal, but moved like fabric, and had small lights built into it that flickered weakly. Most of the lights were dark now, and parts of the suit seemed damaged. The alien woman was barely breathing. Jake could see tiny puffs of vapor coming from her nose and mouth, but they were getting weaker. She was dying from the cold. Jake had seen enough hypothermia cases during his time in the army to recognize the signs. Her strange blue skin was turning darker, and her breathing was too shallow. Jake made his decision without thinking about it too much. This was a living being who needed help, and that was all that mattered to him. He carefully slipped his arms under her body and lifted her up. She was lighter than he expected, and her head fell back against his shoulder. Her skin was ice cold, even through her strange suit. Getting back to his cabin was difficult in the storm, but Jake managed it. He kicked the door open and carried the alien woman straight to his fireplace. He laid her down on his old couch and immediately began building up the fire. The flames grew higher and began throwing more heat into the room. Jake brought every blanket he owned and wrapped them around the unconscious woman. He could see her breathing was still very weak, but at least she was out of the snow. Now he needed to warm her up without shocking her system. He had learned basic first aid in the military and knew that warming someone too fast could be dangerous. He went to his kitchen and heated up some water on the stove. Not boiling hot, but warm enough to help raise her body temperature slowly. Jake filled several bottles with the warm water and placed them carefully around her body outside the blankets. The alien woman did not respond, but her breathing seemed to get a little stronger while the water bottles did their work. Jake examined her strange suit more closely up close. He could see it was definitely some kind of technology. The material felt smooth, like silk, but looked like liquid metal. Small panels were built into the fabric and thin lines that looked like circuits ran throughout the suit. Many of these circuits were dark now, but a few still glowed with faint light. The suit seemed to be damaged in several places. Jake could see what looked like burn marks and tears in the fabric. Some of the small panels were cracked or completely dark. The damage looked like it came from some kind of explosion or crash, which would explain the loud noise he had heard and the tracks in the snow after. An hour by the fire, the alien woman began to stir. Her eyelids fluttered, and Jake saw her eyes for the first time. They were a deep violet color unlike anything he had ever seen. The pupils were larger than human pupils and seemed to catch the firelight in an unusual way. She opened her eyes fully and immediately tried to sit up. Jake gently placed a hand on her shoulder to keep her from moving too fast. She looked at him with those strange violet eyes, and Jake could see fear and confusion on her face. She said something in a language that sounded like singing, but Jake could not understand any of it. Jake held up his hands to show he meant no harm, and spoke in a calm voice. He told her she was safe, and that he had found her in the snow. He explained that she had been very cold, and he was trying to help her warm up. The alien woman watched his face carefully, while he spoke as if she was trying to understand his words. She attempted to stand up but was still too weak. Jake helped her sit up properly on the couch and handed her a mug of warm soup he had heated up. She looked at the mug suspiciously at first, but then seemed to realize it was food. She sipped it carefully, and her eyes widened as if surprised by the taste. Jake went to his bedroom and brought back his favorite hoodie. It was old and soft and very warm. He held it out to the alien woman and gestured that she should put it on. Her strange suit was still not working properly, and he could see she was still cold. She took the hoodie and examined it carefully before pulling it on over her damaged suit. The hoodie was much too big for her, but it seemed to make her feel warmer and safer. Jake sat down in his chair across from the couch and tried to think of what to do next. He had an alien woman in his living room wearing his old hoodie, and he had no idea how to communicate with her or what she needed, but she was alive and warming up, and that was what mattered right now. Jake decided he would figure out the rest as he went along. 3 days passed before Jake and the alien woman could really communicate. The language barrier frustrated them both, but they found ways to work around it. Jake used simple gestures and drawings, while she tried to copy English words he taught her. She was a fast learner and seemed to understand more than she could say. In the second morning, Jake woke up to find her sitting at his kitchen table, working on something small and metallic. She had taken apart what looked like a piece of her damaged suit and was using tools she had somehow made from his spare parts. Jake watched in amazement as her delicate fingers worked with precision he had never seen before. She noticed him watching and held up the device. It was about the size of his cell phone, but made of the same strange material as her suit. She touched something on its surface, and it began to glow. Jake heard a soft humming sound, and then the device spoke in English. The voice was mechanical, but clear. Jake could understand every word. The alien woman smiled for the first time since he had found her, and Jake realized how much more beautiful she looked when she was not afraid. She touched the device again and spoke in her musical language. The device translated her words into English. She told Jake her name was Zara, and she thanked him for saving her life. She explained that she came from a place very far away, and her ship had been damaged. She was supposed to be watching Earth from a distance, but something had gone wrong. Jake listened carefully to every word, amazed that he was talking to someone from another world. Zara asked Jake about his world and his people. She wanted to know about human customs and why he had helped her when he did not even know what she was. Jake tried to explain that helping someone in trouble was just the right thing to do, but Zara seemed surprised by this. She said most species they had encountered were not so kind to strangers. Over the next few days, Jake learned that Zara came from something called the Catherian Republic, which was made up of many different worlds and species. Her people had been traveling through space for a very long time, looking for a new home. They were running away from something dangerous, but Zara did not want to talk about what they were fleeing from. Jake showed Zara around his cabin and his property. She was fascinated by everything, especially his books and the way he had built his furniture with his own hands. She spent hours looking through his collection of novels, and asked him to explain human stories and myths. Zara said her people had stories too, but they were very different from human tales. She was also amazed by the wild animals that visited his property. Jake often left food out for deer and rabbits during the winter, and Zara watched them with wonder. She explained that on her world animals were very different, and most were afraid of her people. But here the animals seemed curious about her, and some even let her get close. Jake learned that Zara was not just any member of her species. She was what they called a ranger, which meant she was trained for dangerous missions. Her job was to scout new worlds and report back about whether they would be safe for her people. She had been watching Earth for several weeks before her ship crashed. Zara tried to leave several times during those first days. She said she was putting Jake in danger by staying, and that her people would come looking for her eventually, but Jake refused to let her go back out into the winter. He told her she could stay as long as she needed to, and that he was not afraid of danger. What Jake did not know was that Zara was already in communication with her people. Through a repaired device, she had reported that Earth seemed like a good place for refugees, and that humans appeared to be kind and peaceful. She had not told them about crashing, or about Jake helping her, because she was afraid they would order her to leave immediately. Zara began helping Jake with his daily tasks around the cabin. She learned to cook human food, and was surprisingly good at it. She also helped him repair things that had broken during the winter storms. Her knowledge of technology was incredible, and she could fix almost anything. Jake had never seen anyone work so efficiently. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and share stories. Jake told her about his time in the army, and how he had come to live alone in the mountains. Zara talked about her home world, and the beauty of cities that floated in the clouds. She described oceans that were purple instead of blue, and forests where the trees sang in the wind. Jake found himself looking forward to these conversations more than anything else. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten how nice it was to have someone to talk to. Zara was intelligent and funny, and she seemed genuinely interested in learning about human culture. She asked questions about everything, from music to politics to why humans kept pets. What surprised Jake most was how quickly he had grown comfortable with Zara being there. It felt natural to have her around the cabin helping with tasks and sharing meals. He had always been a loner, but somehow Zara fit into his life without disrupting his peace. In fact, she made everything better. Zara was having similar thoughts about Jake. She had never met anyone like him before. In her experience, most people were suspicious of strangers and only helped others when they expected something in return. But Jake had risked his own safety to help her and asked for nothing except her company. She began to understand that humans were different from other species her people had encountered. They seemed to have something her people called emotional flexibility, which meant they could adapt to new situations quickly. They also had strong protective instincts, especially toward anyone they considered part of their group. Sarah started wearing Jake's hoodie all the time, even when her suit was working properly. She said it made her feel safe and reminded her that there were good people in the universe. Jake pretended to be annoyed that she had stolen his favorite hoodie, but secretly he was pleased that she wanted to keep something of his on. The seventh day, Zara's communication device picked up signals that made her face go pale. She listened to the transmission, and then looked at Jake with fear in her violet eyes. She told him that ships had been detected at the edge of the solar system, and they were not from her people. Jake asked her what that meant, and Zara took a deep breath before answering. She said the Devourers had found Earth, and that everything was about to change. The peaceful days they had shared were over, and now they would have to fight for their lives, and the lives of everyone on the planet. Jake did not fully understand what Devourers were, but he could see the terror in Zara's eyes, and that was enough for him. He told her they would face whatever was coming together, and that he would not let anything happen to her. Zara looked at him with something like amazement, and realized that humans might be exactly what the galaxy needed. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Jake turned on his radio to hear confused reports from around the world. Strange objects had appeared in the sky over major cities. Governments were calling them weather balloons or aircraft, but Jake knew better after listening to Zara's explanation. The night before, Zara spent the morning working frantically on her equipment. She had managed to repair more of her suit and several other devices that Jake did not recognize. She explained that the Devourers were not like other species they had encountered. They were something much worse than simple conquerors. Jake learned that Devourers were a hive-minded species that consumed entire civilizations. They would study a world and its people for weeks or months, learning everything about their technology, culture, and weaknesses. Then they would launch coordinated attacks that wiped out whole planets in a matter of days. What made them especially dangerous was their ability to control other minds. Most species could be influenced or controlled by Devourers' psychic abilities, which made resistance almost impossible. Entire armies would turn on each other or simply stop fighting when the Devourers decided to take control. Zara showed Jake recordings from other worlds that had fallen to the Devourers. The images were horrifying. Cities burned while their own defenders stood by and watched. People walked calmly into Devourer ships as if they were going on vacation. Jake realized that Earth was facing something beyond normal warfare, but Zara also told him something that gave him hope. She said her people had been studying human broadcasts and communications for weeks before she crashed, and they had noticed something unusual about humans. Human minds seemed to work differently from other species in ways that might make them harder to control. Jake asked what she meant, and Zara struggled to explain it in terms he could understand. She said human emotions were much stronger and more chaotic than in other species. Most intelligent life was logical and predictable, but humans seemed to make decisions based on feelings and instincts that made no logical sense. This emotional chaos might actually protect humans from psychic control, because there was too much noise and confusion for the Devourers to focus on. But this was only a theory and had never been tested in actual combat. Jake was not sure if being emotionally unstable was really an advantage against alien invaders. On the third day after the ships appeared, the first disappearances began. People in cities around the world simply vanished without a trace. Security cameras showed them walking normally down streets, and then they were just gone. The news reports tried to explain it as mass hysteria or coordinated terrorist attacks. Jake and Zara knew better. The Devourers were taking samples studying human biology and psychology to find the best ways to control or eliminate them. They had done this on every world they had conquered, and it always ended the same way. Within weeks, the entire population would be gone. Zara made contact with the remaining Catherian ships hiding in the outer solar system. The news was not good. Her people had suffered massive losses while fleeing the Devourers and had only a few ships left. The military commanders considered Earth already lost and were preparing to retreat to another galaxy, but a few officers were intrigued by Zara's reports about human resistance to psychic control. They agreed to provide intelligence and some equipment, but they would not send troops or ships to help defend Earth. They said it would be a waste of resources to fight a battle that could not be won. This made Zara angry in a way Jake had never seen before. She argued with her commanders through her communication device, switching between her musical language and English so Jake could understand. She told them that humans were different and deserved a chance to prove themselves. Jake was touched that Zara was willing to argue with her own people to defend humans she barely knew, but he was also realistic about their chances. Two people could not fight off an invasion even with alien technology. They needed help, and they needed to warn other humans about what was coming. That afternoon, Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. He told Zara they were going to drive to town and warn everyone they could about the invasions. Zara protested that it was too dangerous and that humans would not believe them, but Jake said they had to try. The drive to town was tense. They could see strange lights in the sky that had not been there before, and Jake's radio picked up emergency broadcasts from larger cities. Reports of mass disappearances were getting worse, and governments around the world were beginning to admit they did not know what was happening. When they reached town, Jake was surprised to find it mostly empty. Many people had left for larger cities thinking they would be safer there. The few remaining residents were confused and scared. Jake tried to explain about the alien invasion, but most people thought he had lost his mind. His neighbor Lisa Barnes believed him. Lisa had been an army medic and had served in Afghanistan. She recognized the look in Jake's eyes and knew he was telling the truth. She also noticed Zara's strange appearance and the technology she carried. Lisa asked what they could do to help. Jake suggested they gather anyone willing to listen and head for the old mine complex in the mountains. It was isolated and had multiple tunnels that could provide shelter and hiding places. Lisa agreed and began contacting other veterans and outdoor enthusiasts who might be willing to fight that night. They held a meeting in Jake's cabin with 12 people who had agreed to listen. Jake let Zara explain about the Devourers and their methods. Several people left immediately thinking it was all crazy, but 6 remained, including Lisa and her teenage son Alex. Alex was especially interested in Zara's technology. He was good with computers and electronics and seemed to understand her equipment better than the adults. Zara was impressed by his quick learning and began teaching him how to operate some of her devices. The group decided to move to the mine complex the next day and begin preparing defenses. They had no idea if they could actually fight the Devourers, but they agreed it was better than waiting to be captured or controlled. Jake felt a strange sense of purpose he had not experienced since leaving the army. They prepared to leave. Jake noticed Zara was still wearing his hoodie over her now fully functional suit. He asked her why, and she said it reminded her that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were impossible. Jake understood exactly what she meant. The war for Earth was about to begin, and somehow a mechanic from Montana and an alien scout had become the first line of defense. Jake was scared, but he was also determined to prove that humans were not as helpless as everyone thought. The old copper mine had been abandoned for 30 years, but the tunnels were still solid. Jake and his small group of volunteers spent 2 weeks turning it into a base of operations. They set up sleeping areas, communication equipment, and workshops in the deeper tunnels, while keeping lookouts posted at the entrance. Lisa Barnes proved invaluable with her medical training and military experience. She organized the group into teams and established patrol schedules. Her son Alex became their technology specialist, working closely with Zara to understand and modify alien equipment. The teenager had an intuitive grasp of how the devices worked that amazed even Zara. Jake used his mechanical skills to create weapons and tools from scavenged materials. Combined with Zara's knowledge of Devourer weaknesses, they managed to build some effective defensive systems. Jake modified hunting rifles to fire Zara's energy cells and created improvised explosives using alien power sources. The first test of their preparations came when a Devourer scout patrol discovered their mountain hideout. Jake had never seen a Devourer before and was not prepared for how terrifying they looked. They were insect-like creatures, the size of large dogs, with too many legs and eyes that glowed with cold intelligence. The creatures moved in perfect coordination, as if controlled by a single mind. They communicated through high-pitched clicking sounds that hurt human ears, and seemed to know exactly where the humans were hiding. Jake felt a strange pressure in his head, as if something was trying to push into his thoughts, but the mental attack that should have paralyzed them completely failed. Jake and the others felt confused and disoriented, but they could still think and move independently. Zara watched in amazement as the humans fought back with chaotic, unpredictable tactics that the Devourers could not counter. Jake threw a homemade explosive that scattered the patrol, while Lisa provided covering fire with a modified rifle. Alex used one of Zara's devices to jam the creatures' communications, causing them to stumble around in confusion. The surviving Devourers retreated after losing half their number to the human defenders after the battle. Zara contacted her commanders again with a detailed report about human resistance to psychic control. The Catharian officers were skeptical, but agreed to send more intelligence about Devourer operations. They also provided technical specifications for more advanced weapons. Word of the successful defense spread to other survivor groups around the world. Jake found himself coordinating with military units, police departments, and civilian militias through encrypted communications. Many groups had discovered that humans could resist devourer mind control, but few had been able to fight back effectively. Jake and Zara began sharing their tactics and weapon modifications with other resistance cells. They learned that human unpredictability was indeed a major advantage. The devourers had perfected their invasion techniques against logical, predictable species, but humans kept doing things that made no tactical sense and somehow succeeded. The resistance grew stronger as more groups adopted human fighting methods. Mixed units of humans with captured alien technology proved especially effective against devourer forces. The aliens had never faced an enemy that could adapt and improvise so quickly during a raid on a devourer research facility. Jake's team discovered something that changed everything. The aliens had been studying captured humans, and their reports showed genuine concern about human capabilities. The devourers were used to controlling entire populations within days, but humans were proving impossible to subjugate. The research data revealed that human emotions created a kind of mental static that interfered with psychic control. Human creativity and stubborn independence made them extremely difficult to predict or manipulate. The devourers were beginning to view humans as a serious threat rather than simple prey. Jake found this information both encouraging and terrifying. If the devourers saw humans as a threat, they might decide to simply destroy Earth rather than try to control it. The timeline for invasion was accelerating as the aliens realized their normal methods would not work. Vera received new intelligence that the main devourer fleet was preparing for a final assault. They had given up on controlling humans and were planning to eliminate all life on Earth. Within the next week, the remaining Catherian ships were preparing to flee the solar system entirely. Jake refused to accept defeat. Even when faced with impossible odds, he convinced other resistance leaders to coordinate a planet-wide counterattack. They would strike at devourer command centers, simultaneously hoping to disrupt their coordination long enough for human forces to inflict serious damage. The plan was desperate and probably suicidal, but it was their only chance. Jake knew that humans had one more advantage the devourers had not accounted for. When humans were cornered and facing extinction, they became incredibly dangerous. Even the most peaceful person would fight like a wild animal to protect their family, and Homely said worried that they were sending people to their deaths. But Jake reminded her that they were all going to die anyway. If they did nothing, at least this way they would go down fighting, and maybe save some part of humanity. Alex supported the plan, saying he would rather die as a free human than live as a controlled slave. Zara made her own choice to stay and fight alongside the humans, even though her people ordered her to return to the fleet. She told Jake that she had learned more about courage and determination from humans than from her own species. She wanted to see how the story ended. As they prepared for the final battle, Jake realized how much his life had changed in just a few weeks. He had gone from a lonely mechanic who avoided people to someone leading a resistance movement against alien invaders. He had also found something he thought he would never have: a partner who understood him completely. Zip was still wearing his hoodie as she checked her weapons and equipment. Jake asked her if she was scared, and she admitted she was terrified, but she said fear was just another human emotion she had learned to appreciate because it meant you cared about something worth protecting. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and Jake knew that win or lose, humanity would never be the same. The galaxy was about to learn that humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were something new and dangerous, and they would not go quietly into extinction tomorrow. They would find out if human stubbornness and creativity were enough to defeat an enemy that had conquered countless worlds. Jake was not sure they could win, but he was absolutely certain they would make the devourers regret ever coming to Earth. The final battle began at dawn. Across 12 time zones, resistance groups around the world launched coordinated attacks on devourer installations, using tactics that Jake and Zara had helped develop. The aliens expected organized military assaults, but instead faced chaotic guerrilla warfare that followed no logical pattern. Jake led his team in an assault on the Devourer command ship that had landed in a valley. 20 miles from their mountain base, the ship was massive and heavily defended. But Jake had learned that humans could do impossible things when they stopped worrying about survival and started thinking about victory. The attack force consisted of 30 humans with modified alien weapons and equipment. They used dirt bikes and snowmobiles to approach the ship at high speed from multiple directions. The Devourers tried to coordinate their defense, but human tactics made no sense to their logical minds. Lisa Barnes led a medical team that doubled as explosive specialists. She had learned to make bombs from alien power cells that were far more destructive than anything humans had built before. Alex coordinated communications between attack groups, using Catharian technology that he had somehow improved. Zara fought alongside Jake as they battled their way through the ship's outer defenses. She was amazed by how humans became more dangerous when facing impossible odds. Instead of giving up, they seemed to find reserves of strength and creativity. They did not. No, they possessed. The ship's interior was a maze of corridors and chambers, designed for creatures very different from humans, but Jake's team adapted quickly, using their smaller size and agility to move through spaces the Devourers could not easily defend. They improvised tactics as they went forward, making decisions based on instinct rather than planning. The Devourers tried repeatedly to take control of human minds, but the mental attacks that had worked on every other species failed. Completely human emotions were too chaotic, and human thoughts too unpredictable for the aliens to gain any lasting control. Jake and Zara fought their way to the ship's command center, where they found something that shocked them both. The Devourer commanders were in complete confusion. They had never encountered a species that could resist their abilities, and were struggling to understand how to fight an enemy they could not control. The battle for the command center was fierce but brief. Human unpredictability proved decisive when Jake did something that made no tactical sense at all. Instead of attacking the command computers, he targeted the ship's artificial gravity system. The resulting chaos gave his team the opening they needed. When the command ship's systems failed, it sent out a distress signal that reached every Devourer unit on Earth. The signal carried something unexpected: panic and fear. The Devourers had never experienced defeat before, and did not know how to process the emotions their commanders were broadcasting around the world. Other resistance groups reported similar successes. Human forces were not just surviving against impossible odds, they were actually winning battles against a technologically superior enemy. The Devourers began retreating from population centers and calling for reinforcements, but reinforcements never came. The main Devourer fleet had been monitoring the battle and made a decision that shocked the galaxy. For the first time in their species' history, they chose to retreat from a world they had intended to conquer. The cost of subduing humans was too high, and the risk too great. Jake stood in the ruined command center, watching alien ships flee Earth's atmosphere. He could hardly believe they had actually won. The victory had cost them dozens of brave fighters, but they had saved their world and proven that humans were not helpless. Zara received communications from the Catharian fleet confirming that the were retreating. Her people were amazed by the news. No species had ever successfully resisted a Devourer invasion, and the aliens were spreading word of human capabilities throughout the galaxy. The aftermath of the battle brought unexpected changes to Earth. The Catharian Republic offered to share technology and establish diplomatic relations with humanity. Other alien species, who had been hiding from the Devourers, began making contact, wanting to learn human fighting techniques. Jake found himself appointed as Earth's first ambassador to alien species, a job he never wanted but could not refuse. He worked closely with Zara to establish protocols for contact with other worlds and to help humanity prepare for its new role in galactic politics. 6 months after the invasion, Jake and Zara stood on the observation deck of the first human space station, built with alien technology. Earth had changed dramatically as humanity embraced its place among the stars, but some things remained. The same. Zara was still wearing Jake's old hoodie, even though she now had access to the finest Catherian clothing and equipment. She said it reminded her of the day she learned that kindness and courage were more powerful than advanced technology. Jake understood because she had taught him the same lesson. The space station served as headquarters for the new Human Defense Corps, a military organization that combined human tactics with alien technology. Veterans from the Resistance had become instructors teaching other species how to fight using human methods of improvisation and emotional resilience. Jake often thought about how his quiet life had changed when he decided to help a freezing stranger in his backyard. That simple act of compassion had led to first contact between species and ultimately saved Earth from conquest. He had learned that individual choices could change the fate of entire civilizations. Earth had become a refuge for species fleeing the devourers, and a training ground for new resistance movements. The galaxy was learning that there were alternatives to surrender when facing impossible odds. Human stubbornness and creativity were spreading to other worlds. Like a virus of hope, the devourers had retreated to distant galaxies, but they would eventually return. Jake knew the war was not over, just postponed. But he also knew that humanity would be ready, and they would not be alone. Other species were learning to fight back, using lessons taught by a mechanic from Montana and an alien scout. Jake and Zara continued working together, preparing Earth's defenses and helping other worlds organize their own resistance movements. Their partnership had grown into something deeper, built on mutual respect and shared experiences that transcended species boundaries. Sometimes in quiet moments, Jake wondered what would have happened if he had not gone outside that snowy night, or if he had been too afraid to help a dying alien. But he knew those were pointless questions. The important thing was that he had made the choice to help, and everything good that followed came from that single decision. The galaxy was a different place now, because one human had chosen compassion over fear, and one alien had chosen to trust in human goodness. Together they had proven that the strongest civilizations were not always the most advanced, but rather those willing to stand up for what was right. As Jake looked out at the stars, he knew that somewhere in the darkness, the devourers were watching and planning their return. But he also knew that humanity would be waiting with allies and weapons, and most importantly, with the unbreakable human spirit that had already changed the galaxy forever. War was far from over, but for the first time in cosmic history, the prey had become predators, and the hunters had learned to fear the hunted.